Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nwabisa Makunga, the editor of the Sowetan newspaper here in Johannesburg. And today I'm really privileged to be facilitating what I believe is a hugely important conversation hosted by the Black Management Forum, the unfinished business of economic empowerment. How do we define it? What does it mean? Particularly for us as individuals in the different spaces that we operate, but also in the direction that our country is going. This is, of course, an inaugural webinar in a series of conversations to be hosted by the BMF that are really looking at transformation, the role of the Black middle class, the youth policy development, as well as our everyday experiences when it comes to this journey of transformation and development in our country. Colleagues, allow me to please welcome the President of the BMF, Mr. Andile Nomlala, the Deputy President of the BMF, Ms. Tasneem Fredericks, and of course our guest of honor today, African scholar, lawyer, global activist, Professor Patrick Lumumba. Allow me to also extend a word of gratitude on behalf of the BMF to BMF sponsors, their anchor sponsors, which are CISO Medical Fund, Standard Bank, Sanlam, and of course the sponsor for this particular session, which is Vodacom. A special welcome to you, all members of the BMF, its partners, its stakeholders, and everybody who has basically joined this session. I see a lot of people are still joining in, so thank you so much. I really hope that we really have a conversation and you assist me to direct this conversation in a way that is authentic and to create a really exceptional moment of engagement. I'd like to call Mr. Nomlala to basically give his welcoming remarks. You all know him. He is a man who has led this organization for quite some time. He has held different leadership positions in the structures of the BMF. Mr. Nomlala is also the founding CEO of NCS Investments, which is a private equity firm that focuses on investing in businesses that are looking to scale. He's also quite a voice of transformation in South Africa, and one that has created, really a position in himself to be the voice and kind of carry on, what we are all wanting to see, transformation in a very real and practical way. Andile, please grab the mic, the virtual mic, and welcome.
Okay, thank you, Nwabisa, for such a warm welcome. I really appreciate it. I must firstly thank the Prof for joining us and the Deputy President for being part of this program. Before I say anything, it is quite important in the BMF that we recognize our own stalwarts who are part of our seminar today, who have been the pillar of strength for our organization to get to its present moment. With us, we have actually our own two professors, Professor Bekisbia and Professor Bonang Mohale, who are our past presidents, and those are the two that I have seen. And if there are other past presidents, I would like to welcome them as well. I see that there's a couple of our own Deputy President Dumisani Mpafa, former Deputy President Dumisani Mpafa, Ms. Cecilia Kuzwayo. I saw Meko Kokuman. We want to say thank you for gracing us. And there are colleagues in the business fraternity that are joining us today. The Deputy President of Business Unity South Africa, Martin Kingston, the CEO of Black Business Council, Khanki Matabane. We would like to thank you for joining us as well. I must greet the colleagues that support the BMF in the corporate world, the CEO of Essentia, Vukani Mkati, the Chief Executive of Sanlam Emerging Markets, Babu Themba Mvusi. I see the new CEO, the newly awarded CEO of PwC, Mesheli Mashaba. We want to say thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we are joined by Babu Hloniphiso Mtolo, the chairman of Shell Southern Africa. We are also joined by Tanta Swafubu, who's an executive director at Balo World. And we're also joined by Bongani Matebula, the PIC Exco member and the company secretary. For those few words, colleagues, I would like to welcome the rest of our membership, also particularly my colleagues in the BMF board and the leadership of BMF in all structures across all provinces in the country. Mine is to just welcome you all into this inaugural webinar, where BMF is again reigniting the message on the issues that we are faced with as a country and the continent. The main particular reasons why we want to talk to you today is that we are an organization that has been having sleepless nights about the plight of our people. We are an organization that has been having sleepless nights about the lack of progress in our society when it comes to economic transformation, economic integration in the continent, and in overall the renaissance of Africa, the dream that our forebears have long had. And we are this generation that has the responsibility and the expectations we carry within our shoulders to make sure that the renaissance of Africa is actually realized. It's now or never, colleagues, when we have seen and we have experienced the ravaging effects of the coronavirus, what it has done to our people, what it has done to the most impoverished and vulnerable people of our continent, what is yet to do in the economic devastations that we are facing, the calamity of the crisis of COVID-19 to our economic fortunes. We are, as the BMF, having sleepless nights with that as an organization. We want to probe and engage luminaries of Professor PLO Lumumba's caliber to give us some umkombandlela of where and how, as this generation, we should deliver ourselves into prospects of the economic fortunes of the future. For me, it's also to zoom into our own economic crisis as a country, where we are now faced with the fact that we are being exposed and the poverty lines are quite glaring, purely because before we got into the COVID-19 crisis, actually, we were already limping because we were just downgraded. Our economy hadn't been growing for the last couple of years. We have been in recession for 3 times in the last 4 years. And we are saying that as the organization, particularly the youth of our country, particularly the professionals in our country, who I count as amongst the people who have at least derived some dividends in our democracy. We have since acquired the necessary skills. We have since acquired the necessary knowledge to be party to the solutions to be party in bringing solutions to our country's problems, to our continent's problems. But I think, and this is the call that I want to make, and it's the call that the BMF itself and its membership at large should probe deeper in its conferences and in every other platforms going beyond today, is that what is our role as professionals? Is it only going to be limited to us complaining via the social networks? What is our role as the skilled mandarins of our continent to build our continent? Why is it that we are actually, amongst many things, the most people that are party to the corruption and the maladministration that takes place in public and private sector these days? We are the professionals that facilitate and augment and give catalyst to corruption as a devastating effect into our own people's progress. We use our own educations and skills to actually be conduits in partnership with both politicians and business people to facilitate malfeasance and corruption in our own state entities, in our own municipalities, in our own private sector companies. We can't, as much as we want to admit that the responsibility of steering the ship doesn't necessarily only lie with politicians, it also lies with our own responsibility and our own ethical conduct and our own awareness and consciousness to know that as we learn and get educated, we have a responsibility beyond ourselves that we must deliver nothing less of the highest standard of ethical leadership and Black excellence in our roles and responsibilities. But the Black professionals of today are party and are muddied into these malfeasance and corruptions that we're talking about. It is therefore the BMF's call that perhaps it's high time that we do a self-introspection and look who amongst us is party to this, and we castigate those and isolate them so that they know that there is no space where we could celebrate graduates and professionals who comes out of a system that have been developed by our grandparents and our grandfathers and mothers to make sure that we live a better life. But all we use our education for is to actually advance and abate corruption. It is the call of BMF, therefore, to say that it's also high time that those of us who still remembers and cares about the responsibility of building a society that is equitable and conducive for all humans to live in, that we must not also make the mistake of being spectators in the game that we're supposed to play. The spectator I'm talking about I think it's high time now that the Black professionals or professionals in general around the continent must swell the ranks of the political structures and political leadership. It's either we swell the ranks within the existing organizations, or we take a bold step if we claim that we have the necessary know-how and we have the necessary knowledge and the necessary skill to run proper government. If we take that claim, it's high time that we must test ourselves with our own people to see if they have confidence and they would have faith on us to be the new leaders of tomorrow. It's no longer the time where we can stand aside and look when things are falling apart. It's high time that the responsibility of the integrated Africa, the borders that are being opened for a free trade African continent, the responsibility comes from the generation of ourselves. We lost leaders in the last week of the likes of Babu and Rumlange. It's a generation that is unparalleled with their own responsibility of bringing us political liberation. Somebody said in one of these days that when the elders are born, when the elders are passing on, the young have not yet been born. We are in a period where ourselves as this generation haven't showed up our hands. We haven't taken the baton. We haven't demanded the baton to lead. We are under the auspices of an average age in an African continent that is useful in its composition. But we have an average age of leaders that are plus minus 70 years old. The question that comes is, how are they gonna be able to lead us into the new future, understanding the needs and the dynamism and the technical and the complexities that comes with leadership in our days? We have university graduates who are university graduates from top universities in the continent and abroad, but we don't seem to be occupying any space of leadership across the spectrum from both the political space, business leadership, and civil society ranks, including unions and many other spheres of governance in any continent or in any country. So the call for BMF is that as this leadership of youth and as the BMF leadership, which has been decorated, many of the past BMF leaders have lived and they have shown and they have charted paths that we could build our own heritage. We could build our own wisdom to make sure that we contribute from where they left off. We have leaders of caliber of Tatu Wiseman and Kufu. We have leaders of caliber of Babu Don Kwanas. We have leaders of caliber of Babu Lotndrov, who were all recognized by the President of the Republic for their leadership and contribution to our country. The question that comes is that, are we as this generation ready and prepared? And do we have the necessary zeal, the arsenal to fight and reclaim the doldrums of our own economic fortunes, to reclaim the prospects and the future that belongs to us and our children from the people that seems to be dilapidating it, from people that seems to be completely dispelling it, from people that seems to be not caring about what would be left. We have experienced in our own country people who are pillaging and squandering resources that are meant for COVID-19. And those people are still amongst us, and we are calling them our leaders. Some of us are prepared to stand in front of them and defend them. So BMF today is starting a series of these conversations. We will put up together our own economic paradigm that we want, that the new South Africa that the President of the Republic is talking about, that we must reimagine the future. We must not make the mistake of missing and using this COVID crisis as an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves. We must not make the mistake of missing the opportunity of making good out of this crisis. So as the BMF, we're calling upon all of you South Africans to say, here is equalo lityala madoda. Yabulela.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nomlala. I think we've heard you. We have heard you. We appreciate everything you've said and definitely your remarks. Colleagues, please be informed that, of course, throughout the session, we will be taking questions. We won't take them live as we go, but you're more than welcome to put them on the chat. And all these questions, we will try to engage with as many as possible, at the later part of this session. For now, I'd like to call, and allow me to be cliche, right? And say, allow me to call a man who absolutely needs no introduction. But I will attempt to introduce him anyway. Professor PLO Lumumba is a professor of law, public law. He holds an LLD on law of the seas from a university in Belgium. He holds a Master of Law degree, Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Nairobi. He has an honorary degree of Doctor of Letters from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. He is also a holder of a degree of Doctor of Science from the Bells University of Technology in Nigeria. He's also a speaker, as many of you know, passionate about Black development, about Africa, and renowned really in the work that he has published. Prof, welcome all the way. Are you okay? Can you hear us?
Thank you. I can hear you loudly and clearly.
Welcome. You're more than welcome to give your address.
Thank you very much. Let me start by doing what Nigerians do very well by saying that I stand on the protocol that have already been established. But that notwithstanding, I'll acknowledge my new acquaintance, Andile Nomlala, who is the president of BMF. I also allow me to acknowledge Fredericks, who is the deputy president, the board of directors, the past presidents and past deputy presidents and captains of industry who have joined us in this conversation this early evening. Let me say how glad I am to join you to have a conversation around a subject that is evergreen. I remember so very clearly, courtesy of history, that when the freedom fighters were seeking to liberate us from the clutches of the colonialists, the clarion call was, seek ye first the political kingdom and the rest will come later. We sought and obtained the political freedom. Whether we have it or not is a debate for another day. But there is a sense in which the economic freedom has eluded us over the years. And that is true even to the casual observer. Only this morning, I received a message from one of my young friends from Uganda, a young engineer, and he sent me a message really out of nothing, but I found great sense, and the message read in part, that Africa's challenges can be summarized into the following, he said. Number one, he said, inferiority complex. Number two, he said, without elaboration, poor attitude. Number 3 said, without elaboration, capitalism. Number 4, he said, once again, without elaboration, false religion. Number 5, he said, family destruction. Number 6, he said, ironically, multipartism. Number 7, he said, imperialism. Number 8, he said, treason. And number 9, he said, corruption. And number 10, he concluded, poor education system. Whether I agree with him or not is another debate. But I think what he must have meant is that the continent is besieged in many ways. Not that we have not made steps in the directions which we have chosen, but the problem from where he sits and from where I sit, having cast my lot with him, is that we are in a continent whose potential is limitless and monumental. But yet there is a sense in which in all critical indices of development, we are lagging behind other continents. Whether you talk to economists or other professionals, they will always tell you that Africa is great in prospect, not in fact. They tell us about the natural resources which reside under the belly of Africa. They tell us how the Democratic Republic of Congo has resources in the tune of in excess of 34 trillion United States dollars conservatively. Yet paradoxically and ironically, it is one of the poorest nations on the face of this earth. They tell us that Niger is the home of uranium, a compulsory ingredient in all nuclear projects in the world. Yet paradoxically, it is one of the poorest nations on earth. They tell us that the solar energy that the world needs could be generated out of Namibia and Sahrawi and Morocco combined. Yet, when you look at the energy sector in Africa, including your own country, which is one of the better countries, ESCOM is not performing as it should. When you look at South Africa, which is in truth one of the 2 most advanced and strongest economies in Africa, possibly at 600 billion United States dollars. That is 1/10 of the economy of the state of California in the United States of America. So there is a sense in which a conversation such as this is not only legitimate and timely, but relevant and critical. Critical particularly because those of you who are in the BMF recognize very early that the African in your own country primarily was handicapped by design. The apartheid regime, its operational DNA was to dehumanize the African. Its operational DNA was to deprive the African. Its modus operandi was to ensure that the black man and the black woman remained fundamentally as a hewer of wood and a drawer of water. One may say that in 1994, when the apartheid regime in its full splendor was consigned to the museums of history, that things changed. But you and me know that that is not true. What happened is that the visible signs of apartheid were symbolically consigned to the museums of history. But the fundamentals remained alive and well in a subterranean and in a subtle way. Subterranean in the sense that the restaurants which until then were the preserves of the whites were now symbolically open to the blacks. The schools were symbolically open to the blacks. But in reality, the economy did not allow them to enjoy what was symbolically availed to them. I remember as a young law student, one of my law professors in teaching me the law of property in land said, the last colonial question is land. And I say this because in your own country, the last colonial question has never been resolved. Your country remains one of the few countries on earth where a small percentage of the population still owns the bulk of the land. So the last colonial question has never been resolved. Your country remains one of the few countries in the world where every sector of the economy, despite the naysayers saying otherwise, are still controlled by one people. I'm not with you in South Africa, but confirm to me and contradict me if you think I'm wrong. If you go into the banking sector, the blacks are not well represented. If you go into the insurance sector, the blacks are not well represented. If you go into the mining sector, despite the black empowerment, blacks are not represented. If you go into the food processing sector, the blacks are not represented. If you go into the agricultural sector, blacks are not represented. If you go into the technology sector, the fourth industrial revolution and all that accompanies it, blacks are not represented. If you go into the legal sector, blacks are not well represented. That is the reality. And I speak about South Africa as Africa in microcosm. The same argument could be made about many African countries, but we shall come to that later. If you are to move a little north and you go to Namibia, the last colonial question has not been resolved. The African still remains the periphery of the economy. If you go to Angola, which was a Portuguese colony and prides herself as an exporter of oil, that oil is exported by Mobile Hudson. If you go to Mozambique, it is the same. If you go to Lesotho, which is marooned within South Africa, and you go to the textile industries, the Chinese who own the textile industry. If you go to Zimbabwe, where President Mugabe tried to solve the last colonial question, he was visited with pain which has been sustained by the Western world. And they continue to survive, and I use the word survive deliberately because they are merely surviving. If you go to Zambia, the copper industry is controlled by the Chinese. And one can go on, and one sees that the African continent, whether you are talking about the south of it, if you come to East Africa, you'll find that the Indians still control the economies of our countries. If you go to West Africa, you find that the Lebanese still control our economies. You go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Belgians still control our economies. I say this because there is a sense in which if we do not contextualize our situation in both past and current history, we'll not be able to appreciate where we ought to go. So today, as we have this conversation, which we must have, and you are black managers, and you are pained by the plight of Africa, and you are pained by it, particularly during this period when we have COVID-19, the question that we must ask by way of diagnosis is, where did the rain start beating us? There are those who now hold the view that we have complained for too long, that we have lamented for too long, that we have blamed others for too long, and that we are partly co-authors of our own misfortune, that when we regain political independence, those whom we entrusted with political leadership have punished us, and that we therefore ought not to complain about the past. There may be merit in that. There may be merit in blaming the past, but there is also merit in blaming those who have the mantle of state. But yet, what confronts us today is to use the past to inform the present that we may address the future. And when I look at my mother continent, the continent of Africa, there is a sense in which it is not all doom and gloom. It is not all doom and gloom, but there are things that we can and ought to do differently. And you who belong to the BMF are part of the solution. The mere fact is that you have recognized that there is a problem is in itself the beginning of the solution of the problem. And this makes me remember what I told you at the beginning about my Ugandan friend, Engineer Mwesiga. When he wrote me this morning and told me about our 10 problems, the first of which was inferiority complex. You of the BMF, do you sometimes think that part of our problem could be inferiority complex? That sometimes we believe or behave as if we believe that we cannot even achieve the most mundane of things? Do you sometimes think like that? I remember not so long ago reading a book written by an African-American educationist in 1933, Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. He says many things, but one of the things that I picked about that is he said that when another civilization has so controlled your mind then they need not worry about your action because they can predict what you will do. And he said that if you have been made to believe that yours is the back door rather than the front door, even when the front door is open, you will look for the back door. And if there is no back door, you will create a back door. Do you sometimes feel that that is part of our problem and that therefore we ought to recognize that going forward we must have faith in ourselves? We must have faith in our ability to be good managers. You know, about a month ago, I was telling a friend of mine about inferiority complex. And I reminded him that I know many people who are my friends, who have been students at the University of Nairobi in Kenya, or Pretoria University, or the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, where they earned their undergraduate and masters and PhDs. But when they go for a 1-week course at Harvard, then they say they are Harvard educated. And when they buy stickers for their cars, they use the Harvard sticker, not the University of Pretoria. Inferiority complex. The belief by us that that which is made by us and that which belongs to us is not good enough. And I reminded my friend, when they say, for example, that Harvard is the best law school, I said, that cannot be true. Is the best law school as regards the law of South Africa? That cannot be true. It is only the University of Johannesburg or the University of Witwatersrand or Pretoria that can make that claim. So you of the BMF, I'm today urging you that one of the things that we must do is to recognize that we have both the intellectual wherewithal and the ability to achieve. Because once you believe in yourself, then there is no way you cannot achieve that which you desire. You know, President Andile Nomlala, when he was making his opening remarks, talked about the Renaissance. And Renaissance was a word that was used to good effect by your former President Thabo Mbeki when he talked about African Renaissance. And he said that Africa must begin to recognize herself. And she can only begin to recognize herself when our sons and daughters begin to recognize that they are capable of achieving things. I'm urging us today that as we look and see the future, we must see the future from the prism of our ability to achieve things. Right now, we are all marooned in our countries. You South Africans are laboring under restriction level 3. Many African countries are restricted. We cannot fly out. The visas that we used to run for to travel to the United States of America, we can no longer go there. The visas that we ran for to go to Europe, we can no longer go there. We are now in our countries, if our health system did not work well, we are stuck with our health systems. If our education systems were not running well, we are stuck with them. There is a terrible beauty to COVID. It is terrible that it has confined us, but there is beauty in that it has allowed us to introspect and to realize that there are many things that we can do. You of the BMF, as we engage in this conversation today, we must ask ourselves going forward, what must we do in different sectors? I know your primary concern is about the whole gamut of management, but let us be a little broader when we talk about the whole gamut of management and leadership in the things that we do. There are some people who call it husbandry. How do we take care of the things that are given unto us? And I'm suggesting to us that for too long, we have relied on things and methods and systems that are not homegrown. The time has come that we must ask ourselves fundamental and foundational questions going forward. And let me give you a few examples, if only to illustrate why I believe that we can lift ourselves by our bootstraps. I'm using the word bootstraps, fully aware that this time round we have boots. It is Martin Luther King Jr. who said that it is a very harsh joke to tell an individual who has no boots to lift themselves by their bootstraps. But the beauty of our moment is that at least we have boots and straps therefore. Let us look at the different sectors in our economy and what we can contribute in those sectors. And because I'm speaking to you who are in South Africa, let us look at the area of agriculture. How can we, going forward, ensure that food security is something that is a primary focus, and that the men and women whom we train in our institutions of learning, of higher learning, and other levels of education are capable of providing the expertise in the area of agriculture. You and me know, for example, that in the area of production of wine, your country is possibly the 12th largest exporter of wine in the world and the leading in Africa. The top one is Italy, and the Italian wine exports is larger than the economy of all East African countries combined, wine only. The question is, how many Africans are involved in that area? How many Africans are in management in the Western Cape? Of course, when we visit South Africa, we are taken to the vineyards and we consume, we have copious amounts of wine through tasting. But who controls that wine? Where are you, my brethren? You are absent in that sector. So when you talk about management, are you present in that sector? You are not. If you are present, it is in a tokenist way. You'll be found at a middle-level management, and what they do for you when you are in middle-level management, they give you a house and you have a mortgage and you have a good car and you are a member of a golf club and you have holiday with your family once a year or twice a year, and you have a medical cover, and when you die, you are given a pension or your family is given a pension. Beyond that, you are not present. If you go to the mining sectors or the mining sector, are you present? You are not present. If you go to the financial sector, are you present? No, you are in the periphery. So there is tokenism that is going around. You are not at the dinner table, you are under the table. And when the crumbs drop down, you think that that is the dinner. The dinner is on top of the table. And you had better stand up. You've been sitting for too long while the others are eating standing, so you can only, your vision is blurred. And that is only in South Africa. If you go to any other country, the situation is no different. When we are training our young people, we are talking about inferiority complex, but what about our attitude? Because what is attitude? Which is a Siamese twin of inferiority complex. A friend of mine once told me that part of our problem in Africa is our low thresholds of satisfaction. We are easily satisfied. Finds a BMW, and I know there is a factory making BMWs in South Africa. And now in the days of social media, they put themselves on social media with a single BMW, not knowing that there is somebody who owns a factory that makes BMWs on a daily basis. And you are proud of one BMW which you bought on loan. When you are talking about management, you had better talk to them about change of attitude. Because the mind is still the standard of the man, which is also closely related to education. What are we teaching our young men and women? You know, and allow me if I'm candid and harsh. Sometimes I think about apartheid, South Africa, and I think about it morbidly. And when I think about it, I remember Jan van Riebeck and how they came into that country and found Africans, and how over the years they subdued the Africans, and how in 1948 Hendrik Verwoerd institutionalized apartheid, and how they consigned the majority of the Africans into the most marginal parts of South Africa, and how they then started building infrastructure for themselves. From Cape Town to Durban, from Durban to Port Elizabeth, from Port Elizabeth to Johannesburg, to Mpumalanga, and to all those places in South for themselves. And how during my own lifetime, they created the Bantustans, the Bantustanization, to confine Africans into the Bantustans. How they built hospitals for themselves. South Africa has now known what we call independence since 1994. And I'm not downplaying what has been done by the previous administrations. But the question is, couldn't we have done better? It is not about what we have done, it is what we ought to have done. Couldn't we have done better? Couldn't the African manager be doing a little better? Is there a possibility, and correct me if I'm wrong, is there a possibility, as I said at the beginning, that apartheid is still alive and well, but is a subtle subterranean apartheid which is informed and underpinned by well choreographed economic manipulation? Is there a possibility that the African still largely plays the menial role that he or she played even during the days of Hendrik Verwoerd and John Vorster and P.W. Botha? Is there that possibility? I posed the question rhetorically, not expecting any answer. And that same question can be posed in Luanda in Angola. If you go in Luanda in Angola, apart from a small class of the politician? Are the Portuguese still not the ones who enjoy? And is their true north not still Lisbon? And if you go to Equatorial Guinea, is their true north still not Madrid? And if you go to Ivory Coast, is their true north economically and politically not still Paris and Senegal? You of the BMF have asked me today to talk about management and what we can do. I've lamented enough. Let me now look to the future. Because when you look to the future, you must lament first in order to have a foundation upon which to say why lamentation does not solve problems. Is Africa now moving in a direction that we ought to encourage and celebrate? The answer is yes. The beauty of Africa today is that we have recognized that going forward, we cannot continue to do what we have been doing over the years. And when I look at Africa, I see an Africa that is now alive and pregnant with hope. I see an Africa in the SADC region that recognizes that going forward, our economic health not only requires but demands that we work as a team. In the banking sector, you will know that South African companies such as Standard Bank, ABSA, and others are present in different parts of Africa. In the insurance sectors, you'll find Old Mutual present in different parts of Africa. In the retail sectors, you'll find ShopRite present in East Africa, present in Central Africa, present in West Africa. It is a recognition that we must work as a unit, and I love that. In West Africa, I see West African banks such as Zenith, such as UBA, such as Access, beginning to have a footprint in different parts of the continent. In East Africa, I see banks such as Kenya Commercial Bank or Equity Bank having a presence in different parts of the continent, in Central Africa and in different parts in West Africa. I see the Bank of Mauritius present in East Africa and present in different areas, and there is a beauty to that. That recognition is what, in my view, gives me the hope that organizations such as yours can no longer afford the luxury of being confined to South Africa. South Africa was your incubation. I now want to see your tentacles beginning to expand. I now want to see BMF being involved with universities such as the University of Witwatersrand, the Lagos School of Business, the Nairobi School of Business, the Cairo School of Business, and all these other institutions for purposes of beginning to inform conversation that will convert the continent of Africa in a totally different direction. And I was saying that one of the things that I like about the Africa that I now see is that Africa is alive and sensitive to the realities. It is organized regionally around SADC. It is organized around East African Community. It is organized around Central Africa. It is organized around IGAD. It is organized around ECOWAS. It is organized around the Maghreb. It is organized around the Horn of Africa. And it is organized continentally around the African Union. And that indeed is the basis on which Africa Agenda 2063 was hatched in the year 2013, when your own great countrywoman, Nkosana Dlamini Zuma, was the chair of the AU Council at that time. And the whole idea of Africa Agenda 2063 was informed by this, that if it is the case that we squandered the last 50 years of independence since the founding of the OAU, now the AU, from 1963 to 2013, going forward for the next 50 years, we are not going to allow that to happen. We are going to ensure that we reorganize and reorient our direction so that under Africa Agenda 2063, we are going to change how we manage things. We are going to change how we conduct our affairs. We are going to ensure that there is greater African integration. And Africa Agenda 2063 also echoes what at the international level is summarized under the Sustainable Development Goals. And the beauty of it now, in order to operationalize that, we now have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And as fate would have it, it is once again your countryman, Wamkele Mene, who is the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which to start work this month, but for COVID is now postponed to start in January of next year with the Secretariat in Accra in Ghana. When I look at all those things, this is what I see. Light at the end of the tunnel. And the tunnel is not long, it is a short tunnel. And the light I see is not the light of an oncoming train. It is the light of a rising sun. And the sun that I see are organizations that are now sensitive and sensitized to the realities of what Africa needs. Organizations such as yours. Organizations that are able to identify that going forward, fortune favors the vigilant. If you want to win the lottery, you must buy the ticket. If you don't buy the ticket, even if you pray and fast, you never win the lottery. And I think that that is exactly what you are doing. You are telling us that going forward, we must now be organized, we must organize our affairs, and we must ensure that we move in the direction of informing how we conduct our affairs. And wisdom at such times always demands, after I've said the many things that I've said, that I must move with jet-like speed to conclude. And conclude I now will. And how do I conclude? I conclude by reminding us that it is possible to change this continent. And I cannot say what I'm about to say without mentioning COVID. You know, this COVID is a dangerous thing. But this COVID has also been an eye-opener. It has taught many Africans that there are things that we can do for ourselves. In the area of pharmaceuticals, it has taught us that you can no longer rely on Roche and American companies and Asian companies to make your medicine for you. You've got to do it yourself. It has reminded us that we must produce our own food. It has reminded us that we've got to organize our own institutions of learning. It has reminded us that if we are to go forward, we must be able to innovate and to invent. And that therefore, if we are to earn the dividends of the fourth industrial revolution, we must energize our companies. It has reminded us that if we are to go forward, we must have greater inter-African trade. It has reminded us that if we have to go forward, the minerals that we mine, we must have value addition. It has reminded us that if we have to have tourism, we must have intra-African tourism. It has reminded us in the aviation sector that if we have to have airlines that run, there must be African airlines. It has reminded us that if we are to do anything, it must be within the continent of Africa. And that is where BMF fits. How are you going to lift Africans within your country first, so that they don't complain perennially about white monopoly capital? I want to hear about black monopoly capital. And even beyond that, just monopoly capital, if that is a good thing. I don't think it is a good thing. I myself would want to hear about capital. Which capital is available for everybody who is organized and who sees far? You know, your country has produced great men. Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Chris Hani, Steve Bantu Biko, Tirongo Potse, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Albertina Sisulu. I can mention many of them, but allow me to make this point to mention Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. He said, when he was arrested in 1960, when he was asked if he was a racist, he said, there is only one race, the human race. And I think that is how we should look at the world. If we look at it in that way, then all races must rise and do the right things. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hold the view that a conversation such as this is critical, that the disadvantaged must be taken care of, and that is why we have institutions such as affirmative action. But even affirmative action must be deployed in a manner that will actually benefit the people who deserve it. I hold the view that deliberate effort must be made by government and private sector and institutions and civil society so that going forward, South Africa and by extension, the entire continent of Africa will be a continent that is worthy of being talked about. The last point that I want to make to you, South Africans specifically, there is something that has come out of your country which we call xenophobia. You must be told about this firmly and directly. South Africa is a great country, is the largest economy in Africa. As long as you are doing well, you will attract us and will come to South Africa whether you like it or not. And we want you to accommodate us. And once you have accommodated us, we also want you to move up into the continent of Africa and grow the economies of Lesotho, grow the economies of Angola, help grow the economies of Eswatini, the economies of Angola, the economies of Malawi, of Zambia, of Mozambique. Once you do that, once you succeed in helping us to help ourselves, then we will not come there in droves. But in the intervening period, allow us to come to your country to acquire skills. We'll come there, students will come to KwaZulu-Natal, will come to Pretoria, will come to Johannesburg, will come to Port Elizabeth. We want to come there because we think you have a good thing going. You too, we urge you to come up. We want you to come up. We want to see you in Monrovia. We want to see you in Banjul, the Gambia, because there must be a cross-pollination and cross-fertilization of efforts. It is only then that UBMF will be involved in management, which is not provincial, but continental. It shall be well with us. God bless you and have a good evening.
Absolutely. Wow, Prof. Thank you so much for that. I think looking at the chat, our chat room here, the conversation is really going, and I think you've really been hitting the right spots. I think the truths that you have spoken today are not foreign to us, but I think your articulation of them not only awakens in us what we ought to do, but I think it raises the question of what exactly are we going to do from here on. So thank you so much for that exceptional contribution. Colleagues, if you will allow me, I'd like to invite back the President and the Deputy President of BMF to really kind of open up the floor for us to actually engage. There's a lot of questions that have come through so far. And please, keep on sending them, particularly on the Q&A section of this Zoom call. There's a question that I think, and it has been asked, and I think throughout your talk, Prof, it was a question that was nagging at me, and it's really about, and I'd like to pose it to all three of you colleagues, but perhaps the Prof could talk about it on a matter of principle. And then, Tasneem and Andile could perhaps tackle it in practicality in South Africa. And it's really about, we all understand, what we ought to do. So we understand how we need to lead these organizations. But the question is always, what happens in events where we are limited by policies that really kind of, make people who could lead unable to do so? Prof, you spoke a lot about Black representation in different sectors of our economy. And I think you really were truthful in that regard. But the lack of representation often is very much rooted in the policies that exist, that actually, somebody in the chat says that were written mostly by minorities, or were written to actually benefit minorities. How do we break down those chains to actually be to allow people of South Africa and to allow Africans to be able to access those opportunities?
Where the political class are very critical. I remember in many African countries, Kenya included, I think it was true in Kenya, in Uganda, and Tanzania, and even in Ghana at that time, there was no apology. The leaders simply say, and their policy paper said, it was called Africanization policy. And there was no apology about it. They simply said that Africans have been historically disadvantaged, and deliberate effort must be made to mainstream Africans without compromising merit. I think South Africa tried to do something called Black empowerment, but in my view, that was rather tokenist. I think that there must be a bolder approach in order to ensure that Africans are mainstreamed into the scheme of things. And since 1994, there can no longer be an argument that you don't have qualified Africans in every sector of the economy. And I believe that your white brethren must appreciate that it is also in their best interest that Africans are mainstream, because if that is not done, they too are endangered. And it is important, therefore, that an organization such as this makes clear representation to the administration of the African National Congress. I remember there is a documentary which was made by my own countryman, Professor Ali Mazrui, Africa Triple Heritage. And one of the people who I interviewed at that time was your current president, Matemela Cyril Ramaphosa, when he was a trade unionist. And he was as articulate as he was eloquent, that going forward upon overthrowing the apartheid regime, deliberate effort must be made to ensure that Africans are present at policy-making levels, that Africans are represented in critical areas. And that is not to say, and this must be understood, that is not to say in a country such as yours, which is described rightly as the rainbow country, that is not to say that you are eliminating Indians. That is not to say that you are eliminating Caucasians. They will have their place, but the demography must inform the reality. As it is now, if you look at the demography, it does not inform the reality. And that in and of itself creates resentment. And that resentment is not in the best interest of the country going forward. So what I would suggest is that bodies such as yours petition the political class in a very firm way so that the political class are able to listen to you, whether it is the ANC or the EFF. The EFF, some of you may find, I find some of the arguments, they say things that people don't want to say, and I think that is a good thing. They irritate some of you, but there is a sense in which the things they say, quite a number of them, ought to be said, because there are things that make people uncomfortable, but it is that discomfort that will lead to comfort. And organizations such as yours, which are not politically aligned, must then appeal to different sectors of the economy and different sectors of the political class and inform them that going forward, this is not going to be sustainable. And in fact, and this is the last point I say in answering this question, post-COVID, with many jobs lost in all sectors, and these jobs are lost mostly by Africans, the levels of resentment may rise very high. And if they are not properly dealt with, the immediate target will be those whom they think are enjoying regardless of the COVID. So what must be done is to ensure that those who appear to be enjoying in spite of COVID must themselves be involved in helping and energizing the political class to bring into play policies and ultimately legislation that will begin to address these issues very, very, very quickly. I think that that is the contribution that I want to make in answer to that question. Thank you.
Mr. Nomlala, thank you very much, Prof. Mr. Nomlala.
Thank you, Nobis. You see, Prof is putting it very clear as well in his input that when you want to see progress, let's use apartheid as a system. Apartheid was a well-crafted, highly institutionalized system, but it was obviously segmented for a certain population and certain race. But the philosophy of designing a system, creating regulation and legislative framework that enables the environment, not individuals, but the environment that the individuals exist in, so that each one of them, based on their own personal zeal and abilities, can at least take the opportunity to grab the opportunities that arise. The problem we have in our country, and I think it's a problem we have in the rest of the continent, is that we have developed over the years. I saw two policy documents that came out, economic policy documents that came out from both the Business for South Africa and the African National Congress itself. If you look at the detail of the content that is there, scrutinize it, there's nothing new. We have even, in our extent, developed even policies and regulations and legislative framework that, unfortunately, the implementation of it is questionable, which is what the Prof then says. What does the BMF? Because the implementation element lies more often than not to the mandarins that have the necessary skills, the knowledge to actually execute. The politicians can draft and create these policies, but if there's a mismatch between the execution, the implementation of these policies, then you're going to have these problems. And it's our fault. It's our fault as professionals not to own up to the implementation of these policies in the context of our country. But the other bigger problem we have, Prof, on the same question is that the politicians themselves, or the political class in our country, and it's actually a prevailing phenomena even in the continent, is that the political class, they are now on the fatigue level of execution. And what then they do is that they tend to be inward looking or self-serving. You know, sometimes people would wonder, because I have sat in some of these meetings with some of the other presidents, you would wonder, what beset some of the executions that these presidents that we have had done, particularly on the issues of state capture, corruption, and other things. And people don't look at the part where somebody realized, but you know what, this thing called government is too big. The systems and the particles from both the global economic forces and the local and the continental are too complex for my own comprehension as a politician. And the complexity thereof says my tenure as a president for 5 years is running out. Then what option am I left with? Is that my family and myself must at least show that I was once a president. And how do they do that? Is by looting. This is a prevailing phenomenon in continent. Prof, I go to a place called Goose Valley in Kenya every year for a men's gathering, a gathering of an elite group of Kenyan politicians and business people. And the conversations that we have about the lack of progress and development and what happened under the leadership of Kibaki in Kenya is exactly, but unfortunately yours was extended. But with us, it's exactly what happened under the leadership of President Zuma. The development of our continent, colleagues, can never, at any stage now going forward, be only the responsibility of the political class. If the political system says that we must appoint politicians via a vote, via a ballot, then it means we must then induce ourselves, which is something I said when I opened. It means then that now is the time that we occupy those ballot papers so that the leadership responsibility that we normally subjudicate and give it to somebody else can no longer be a case that we then blame politicians who steal, in the context and in the current situation now, who steal food parcels for COVID-19 patients, who send sanitizers that have 4% of alcohol in them, and as a result affect or infect or result in an infection of 244 students in one school. We can no longer cede the responsibility of our own future and destiny to other people. So the responsibility of the Black middle class of the continent is to have the same demands and expectations in government leadership and the political class leadership of wanting common benefiting development, where I usually make this example before I close. I usually make this example, Prof, that what would have happened with us if we were the ones that colonized people with the behavior that we have? If me and my group of friends were busy sailing towards the Mediterranean and we passed the Pacific and we found ourselves in the London Tower Bridge, would we, and we discover gold there, would we have had the mentality to come back to the people that didn't even send us there and say, we have discovered gold? Because you might find that the era and the period of the king of London in the time, it probably took him 100 years or his grandchildren to be able to set foot in Africa. But the soldiers that were not sent, the people that were going to buy spices in India, discovered wealth here, but they knew that this wealth is not only for themselves. It's the wealth that must be taken home and develop their brothers and sisters back home without them traveling into the continent. Now, if us as Black people of the continent, we don't have the mentality of collective development, lifting each other as we rise, we must forget about transforming our future, because you leverage the rand from all races and nationalities. You leverage the rand by circulating it as much as you can within the people of your own. South Africa, as the Prof is talking, is that we have industries. We are the most industrialized country in the continent. And we are fighting over economic empowerment amongst ourselves. But at the end of the day, we could be taking the established businesses in partnership with the emerging Black businesses into growing this pie into the continent, whilst in South Africa, there's a clear demand that you must transform. Because now we are busy over each other's throats on the already developed and cooked pie. We don't use the arsenal of the balance sheets of the global multinational companies that we have, MTN, Discovery, Sanlam, and others. We don't use that capital to take a younger emerging black business into Kenya, Sanlam having an equity holding. And here in South Africa, you tell Sanlam to invest. We had this during apartheid. We had Anglo, who had businesses in fisheries, who had businesses in breweries, who had businesses across every sector. That's why we built conglomerates, is because those guys, we were in a sanction. So they needed balance sheet of the bigger players to be able to stand the test of the sanction period in South Africa. We have those balance sheets. We have resistant companies who's gonna survive this COVID because they had plus minus 10 to 20 billion rands in their balance sheet. But the question is, does the smaller black business guy, is he gonna survive? And if we don't leverage the synergies and we take the opportunities and use Africa as a continent, as a consumer market, as a productive base, and as a development space for opportunities, where we synergize, we extend each other's opportunities, we leverage, so that as a billion plus people, we can have a standing and the buying power into the global economies. But we are towards inward looking as South Africans. We are even xenophobic in some instances. Instead of us using the opportunity and the open gates that the freedom that Mandela and Andrew Mlangeni fought for have arrived, we use the open gates to industrialize, to re-economize Zimbabwe. We take the produce of Zimbabwe and we go and process it in a processing plant in Messina, and we then export it to Kenya at half the price with an average baseline currency exchange to begin with, without a dollar-denominated currency exchange. We now need the West Africans in Ivory Coast to get clearances of the monies to transact with us in France before they can remit a rand to South Africa. We need, when we transport goods to Ivory Coast, they need to go to Paris first before they can be taken by a cargo flight to Abidjan, because there is no trade, inter-trade, Africa trade barrier lines where we could put things on a railway line from Cape to Cairo. These are the visions that our own people have built. Now the question is, the COVID gives us the opportunity as a reset button to start from zero, all of us, where we say we are building this railway line. Kenya, your economy is this amount, you're gonna contribute X amount. This railway line will pass through you and it will load in these areas for your own produce and goods, but at the end of the day, it will end in Cairo. South Africa contributes, everybody contributes. We use the infrastructure spend that we need, that the developed world is using to now reignite their economies. But we take every little cent amongst each other as the continent and use South Africa's strong arsenal of capital to reignite and rejuvenate the continent. So these things are within our purview, Nobis. But it's just that it takes us now as this generation, by the way, to claim even the political leadership, because we can't, Prof, for your own information, we can't, we kneel down from the ANC every day as BMF. But those guys have no interest, no even the ability to contemplate the possibilities that we bring to them. We don't have the patience, nor the time to still be trying to give them as many ideas, more than the ones they have, and they're not executing on them. The only option we have is for us to take power ourselves. And we leverage each other from the EFF to the Chinamapapuz in Tanzania and other continental organizations. And we build a united, one-focused African continent that would benefit its people irrespective of where people are housed, where people live. I travel to the continent. I want to go and have a holiday in Kenya, Rwanda, and other places. But the image, the infrastructure, the corruption when you get into Nairobi, you can smell it.
Mm.
You can smell it. Here in South Africa, we have an economy that has been leaning solely on the structures of apartheid institutions.
Mm.
If we didn't have apartheid institutions and businesses, we would have long had an economy that has collapsed.
Correct.
It's not a lie. Not a lie. The banking system, the mining sector is a fraction of what it was. We used to have commercial farming in South Africa, 300,000 commercial farmers. We are now 25,000. But the other land is not utilized. It's not productive. And we're busy squabbling about land. Whilst there's availability of land and there's availability of resources, there's just not availability of the vision and the leadership that is decisive to make these calls. I thank you. I thank you, Norbert.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nomnala. Tasneem, you know, I was going to take a guess and basically say that all the proposals that Mr. Nomnala is putting on the table, I think the biggest problem perhaps with them is that there's no will to do it, and perhaps there's, you know, the people to drive them. And then he went on and basically said, absolutely there's no will to do them, and this is why we need to occupy the ballot box. So that's one of his practical proposals on the table. What is yours?
I think, let me first just say that the BMF welcomes Professor Lumumba's spirit of internationalism and Pan-Africanism. You know, I was at with Minister Dlamini Nkosazana Zuma when she was the chair of the AU. In an Africa Day event, I think it was a few years ago at one of the campuses in Mamelodi, she said, you know, in Addis Ababa, as an African, as a South African, she was never referred to as a foreigner. So she found it quite absurd and quite strange, in fact, that as South Africans, we would consider Africans from other parts of Africa as foreign nationals. So I think it's important, the conversation that the Prof makes about using the BMF to lift Africa, to reach out into other parts of Africa. And I think the issue there for me is that globalization has trapped South Africa into a situation into which it's meant to comply with global best practices. And as a consequence, it ignores important local realities. So when we look at, you know, what advice we need, we want to consult, like Prof said, we want to consult institutions such as Harvard, and we ignore the South African ones, which actually have a better understanding of our local needs and our local environment. So I think already there's an issue. And once we identify the underlying issue, it becomes then easier to say, well, what are we doing wrong? And how do we then correct that action? So definitely a greater Africa collaboration and BMF extending its reach to beyond Africa. And then just in terms of, you know, the president has spoken, and a lot of what he said I've agreed with, as well as what the Prof says, you know, how do we make that change? And I think definitely there isn't a will. I like using this quote by the late Bralot and Lovu in his book, The BMF and I. He says that South Africa does not only belong to those who live in it, but it belongs to those who love it. So as any South African of any race, gender, ethnicity, religious, you know, background, we need to ask ourselves, you know, we are living in South Africa, but do we love it? And if we love something, what is it that we want to do to make it a better place for generations to come? I mean, I'm Gen X. So I'm told millennials are from 1980 to 1990 something. I was born a year and a few months after the BMF was actually founded in 1976. So, I mean, we know that there are a lot of fruits of our labors that we may not see. And our forebears, certainly we have political martyrs who didn't see liberation. I often say that the liberation and democratization of South Africa didn't just free Black people in South Africa. It brought freedom to everybody in South Africa, whites, Blacks, gays, people of different religions. It brought freedom to everyone. So there was this, unspoken expectation that white people would do the right thing. And I think largely I'm comfortable to say that a lot of white people are just not interested in doing the right thing. Generationally, there isn't a single white person in South Africa that can say that they have not experienced privilege. Because apartheid was built to ensure generational wealth for white people. And in fact, today they still benefit from that privilege that was created in 1948 or before. I mean, we can go back to 300, 600 years if we talk about imperialism, if we talk about capitalism, for example. So I think that, when we talk also about how do we fix South Africa, a lot of criticism is leveled against policies like affirmative action, employment equity. And it's a difficult one because one needs a blueprint. And the crafters of that blueprint was and continues to be the Black Management Forum. But the interesting part about these policies is that they're actually not friendly towards BEE, and they militate against BEE. We're now looking, I mean, you saw a conversation starting as far back as maybe 2011, where the BMF started engaging in this conversation about the triple PFA and the PFMA. And when one looks at this, when the public sector must procure, they must ensure that they acquire goods, services, that is based on the general principles of fairness, equitability, transparency, competitiveness, and cost effectiveness. But the problem with that is that it doesn't take into account that white business is always going to be more cost effective than Black newcomers. So how do we operate in an environment where we have a policy that says we must address the injustices of the past, but the very same treasury that is supposed to be implementing, historically, the empowerment of historically disadvantaged Blacks is militating against that. I mean, Section 217 is intentionally ignored by Treasury as an example, because Section 217 makes allowance, and I mean, the Constitution is the ultimate law of the country, but Section 217 then gets ignored because that is the mechanism to empower historically disadvantaged individuals in South Africa. So I think that the conversation is it's a very nuanced conversation. It's not one-dimensional. It's multi-dimensionalism. And Prof spoke about economic exclusions, and I think that speaks to inequalities that exist within the banking sector, that exist within the agricultural sector, that exist within corporate South Africa in general. There seems to be a notion now when you look at, and I mean, it's the most absurd thing in the world that we have legislation that actually advocates for the rights of the majority. Nowhere else in the world do we have legislation that advocates for the rights of the majority. Places like America, they have legislation that advocates for the rights of the minority. But in South Africa, we say, like the president of the BMF said, we go to the ballot box and we show our dissatisfaction there. But there's so much voter apathy in this country that we haven't even been able to effectively use that. I think Prof spoke about multi-partisanship, those are all issues that we face not only as South Africa, but as Africa in general. So a lot of what I'm saying is part of my concluding remarks, but I think it's important that when we address this issue of economic emancipation, or the unfinished business of economic transformation, we must have, people talk about stronger together. We need to have open and honest and frank conversations with corporate South Africa. We now know that corporate South Africa is the biggest employer. We also know that they are the biggest procurer of goods. So it can never be that we work in isolation and rely on government anymore to give Black people jobs. I mean, Prof mentioned the fact that during COVID, there's going to be job preservation, not for the majority, possibly only for the minority. And how do we then address those issues? A large part of where we are and how we've adapted our mandate as a BMF talks to the dissatisfaction that we still see factually and empirically in reports like the Commission of Employment Equity that tells us that a large portion of Black professionals are still stuck in middle management. Yeah. So why are we not sitting in boards? Why are we not sitting in top management? Because transformation is a strategic vision of a company. If it doesn't come from the top, you can certainly not expect an uprising from the bottom. It's never going to work. So I think maybe let me end there and see if there are more questions around, what Prof Lumumba and the President has discussed on this issue in particular.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tasneem. There's a question which I think is actually quite interesting, which is from Temba Mvusi. And I don't know if you guys can see it on the chat. So basically he's saying, dear Prof, given the Black Lives Matter movement, the struggle waged by Blacks in the West, who are the minority, what is your view about this struggle playing out in Africa, where Africans are still the economic minority? And perhaps the way that, if I could phrase the question, I think I did say earlier that we at this moment, it's a very crucial moment globally. We know the Black Lives Matter movement, which did not start today, which did not start this year. It's been coming for quite a while. And then they had a George Floyd moment, right? And so I think the question, perhaps if I were to kind of phrase it as well as Temba said, is would there be a George Floyd moment in terms of our economic emancipation in South Africa particularly? Because we all know, if we were to kind of apply the notion of Black Lives Matter in our economic context, would there be a thing, would there be a moment where, it kind of sets things alight and we're basically saying, enough is enough? Or is it really a process and who really pushes that process? Prof?
Let me answer that question by giving a little historical context and contemporary, then I come to the South African situation. Just this morning, I was listening to a speech delivered by Malcolm X in 1964. And I was amazed at how relevant his speech was to this particular conversation. He said that we as African Americans, of course, they called themselves Negroes at that time. We may belong to different religions. You may be a Baptist, I may be a Muslim. But when they hang you, they do not hang you because you are Muslim. They do not hang you because you are Baptist. They hang you because you are Black. And that therefore there is a sense in which there must be Black consciousness. And he said positively that when you look at the Jews, for example, they are conscious about what their interests are, and they establish businesses that are run in a particular manner with particular discipline, designed to help themselves in a particular way. And there is something to learn from them. There is something to learn from the Indians. They are organized, they are disciplined, they do things that are designed to inform their communities. You talk about the Chinese, who are the Johnny-come-latelys into the continent. You see the way they are inward looking, they organize things around themselves, about themselves. And I think that is where we as Africans in the continent must begin to borrow from. And when we say this, we must not be misunderstood. we must not be misunderstood to mean that we are fortifying ourselves against the rest of the world. No, trade knows no boundaries. Trade and science know no boundaries. We are simply saying that we will be better citizens of the world if we are more organized. And I think that going forward, that is what we ought to do. And in answering that question further, I've seen a number of things in the continent of Africa in the recent past that tells me that there is nothing wrong with us. That once you have the focus and the wherewithal, and you've identified your priorities, you can achieve your goals. Rwanda is a country which I give as an example almost ad nauseum. In 1994, genocide, 1 million killed, or its obituary was written. Rwanda really will never rise again. If you go to Kigali now, it's the same time when your country was freeing herself from the clutches of political apartheid. You go to Rwanda now, and I'm not saying that Rwanda is Shangri-La or El Dorado. I'm simply saying that you see a deliberate and a genuine and a determined and an enthusiastic effort from political leadership, from those who are in industry, from the civil society, and the entire populace, which is designed to change the country. And the country is changing. It's changing in every sector. It's changing in the household. The household economy is improving. Poverty and hunger are being addressed. Potable water, the very mundane things, electricity. People are now moving their children from private schools into public schools because public schools are better. And that is happening within the continent of Africa. The other country is Ethiopia. Ethiopia has had her problems and continues to have her problems. But in 1984, when the administration of Meles Zenawi came in, they said, we are going to ensure that in the next 20 years, we will generate 15,000 megawatts of electricity. You South Africans may not appreciate, but many African countries don't generate anything above 5,000 megawatts. Ethiopia now, and there is a quarrel, as you know, between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt about the Grand Renaissance Dam, which will generate 10,000 megawatts of electricity, financed by the Ethiopians in the continent and the Ethiopians in the diaspora. Now you can begin to talk about industrialization. And I think that in Tanzania, you can see the same thing. Even in Kenya, there are certain things in the geothermal. You go to Ghana, in the industry per district. You go to Senegal. So you look at Africa, and I'm talking about the rest of Africa, aside from South Africa, which I'll conclude with. It tells me that we are capable of doing that. And let's talk about the youth dividend, for example. We talk about the middle class. We are now beginning to have genuine middle class. And when I talk about I use the word genuine, I'm being very deliberate. Until now, we have been talking about middle class in a very loose way, without the character and really the gumption of a real middle class. But today, there is a new middle class emerging in Africa. We are the youngest continent in the world. Average of 20 years. Uganda is the lowest at 16 years. This dividend that we call up the youth dividend, involved in innovation and invention, is only going to be useful if we use it and deploy it in a deliberate way. So I think that we are capable of doing things within the continent, given the examples that I've given. Let me come down to South Africa. There is a debate, depending on who you speak to and rebase. They say Nigeria is the largest economy. The truth is that South Africa is the largest economy. All indices taken into account, looking at population, looking at the level of industrialization. For example, look at your own electricity generation. I know ESCOM is not performing as well as it should be, but you are generating anything between 40,000 and 50,000 megawatts. That is the generation of the entire West Africa combined. Nigeria generates no more than 5,000 megawatts. So no serious industrialization in that part of the world. What can South Africa do? South Africa, and the chairman and the vice president have already spoken to it. There is a sense in which you inherited some beautiful infrastructure. The question is, have you improved on it? Have you improved on the mining sector? You have not. Have you improved on electricity generation? The truth is you have not. Have you improved on other infrastructure? The answer is you could have done better. In other words, we are simply saying that the cake has not grown bigger, yet the population has grown bigger. And because the nature of people are people who have been in prison for a long time is that people developed a sense of entitlement. And when you combine a sense of entitlement and with impatience, then the political administration finds itself between the rock and the hard place. And the South African administration, right? President Mandela had a honeymoon position and it was critical that he did. But from Thabo Mbeki through to Zuma, through to Motlanthe, through to President Cyril Ramaphosa, these are periods of impatience and demands. And therefore, I hold the view, and I can't agree with the President more, that this is too serious a business to be left to the politicians. This is serious business. This serious business must involve the private sector. It must involve the civil society. It must involve the political class, because it is only a combination of efforts that will begin to address these matters, initially sectorally, but in a comprehensive manner. And it is not going, there are no instant coffee solutions. And that is why I think that South Africa is in a very unique position, unique in this sense. You have a system and an industry that is sophisticated I mean, you are better than Portugal and many European countries if you look at a number of things. So look at your market, look at SADC, and if you doubt me, look at your present, the footprint of South African companies, MTN, up to West Africa. So you have to nurture this market, which is 1 billion. Look at the entire issue, the area of retail, the ShopRites, and all these other steers and all these other fast food things. South Africa is the engine. If that is done, Temba, I'm saying that these problems can be solved. People only complain because there is scarcity. When there is plenty, people will complain because there is no sausage, but there is egg. The problem now is that there is neither sausage nor egg. And I think that is the problem that we must solve. And all of us must participate. All hands must be on deck. And I conclude by saying that organizations such as yours, the BMF, you are in a very unique position. Unique in the sense that you are organized, you have a history, and therefore you can speak with the firmness that will open the eyes of decision makers, and you must be at the table of decision making. And if you do that consistently, you knock at the door consistently, I have no doubt that we'll begin to see changes. And I conclude by saying, you asked the pointed question, will there be a George Floyd moment? I think this is it. I think COVID is our George Floyd moment. It is not as dramatic, but it is that moment. Because look at it, Nwabisa. This is the only time in the history of South Africa when, barring those who are free-spirited, almost everybody is in South Africa. They can't leave. They can't leave. This is the period when those who are in the business to do this particular conference, possibly I would have been at OR Tambo. You would have paid my airfare and other things, but we are doing it. So we are improving our technology. We are making sure that all this is happening. Everybody is waking up and every sector is suffering. The hospitality sector is suffering. The aviation sector is suffering. So there is new thinking. And I think that new thinking is giving us the George Floyd moment, because COVID is on our neck and we can't breathe. We can't breathe, but we want to breathe, and breathe we will, This is the moment, Temba. This is the moment.
Absolutely, Prof. And I think talking about all hands on deck, there's an interesting question, and I'll bring you in here, Mr. Nomlala, from Musama Kunga. And let me declare no relation, absolutely. But there's still an interesting question where he's basically asking, how could we take advantage of the African diaspora, their know-how and their skills and their experiences, and try to kind of integrate them into the continent and what we're trying to do. Mr. Nomlala, do you want to take this question?
Thanks, Nobis. I think it's a question I was addressing even before, that we have a base. And I will talk, for example, on the example with the Kenyans. The Kenyans have amassed, because I think there's University of Nairobi and maybe 3 other top universities. The Kenyans have built themselves, particularly the youth of my generation. When I interact with them, I realize that the tech industry that they've built, for instance, is only comparable to the Silicon Cape, which is Stellenbosch and Cape Town led by whites, not the African South Africans. So if we take ourselves, particularly as the Black professionals, Black middle class, and we start orientating ourselves with the good things, even if you go to Kenya at Serengeti for a holiday, but just integrate yourself into knowing 1 or 2 Kenyans that you can then pick up a conversation with post your holiday, so that you start having synergies and friendships, like our forebears who were housed and were living in these countries. We need to first be orientated and familiar with each other. Because what you would pick, for instance, there's a business called the M-Pesa business, which is majority still have Vodacom as an interest in it. That business thrived quite spectacularly in Kenya and some of the neighboring countries, but it couldn't thrive in South Africa because the environment was different. We didn't start with ATMs. The access to banks was much more easier. But technology now demands that we must move away from physical structures. Corona has made it worse. So Kenyans, I'm sure, with their way of dealing with the M-Pesa business, they have just integrated that relationship into dealing with the health issues that are related to COVID via the technology segment. Here in South Africa, we're still trying to trace and use cell phones for those. It's a whole lot of complicated situation. So I'm saying, Nobi says that as the new emerging business leaders, political leaders, and religious and academic leaders, we need to just be Africans first. Stop the eyes of seeing the continental brothers as refugees, the continental brothers as people that are coming here. Anybody that does crime anywhere in the continent must be dealt with decisively. But leveraging synergies, building common business interests across the spectrum, broadening the pie, accessing the consumer market are the critical components of how would we build these synergies. The continent might not be owning the economies, the indigenous and the locals might not be owning the economies, but they are far better in terms of the transformational outlook, in terms of what the professor was talking about, the issue of inferiority complex. You see, Nabisa, I lived in Cape Town for 17 years before I came to Joburg. And I was, and the strife that sits in the head of a Black person in Cape Town, forget the fact that maybe it's induced and it's deliberate. but the mindset itself. You would get a black South African in Cape Town who has money for the weekend. Let's say he's enjoying something for the weekend. He would go to Mzoli or what, some Chisanyama, which is people must enjoy it, they like it, and they would spend 40 plus, 4,000 plus. But then you go to Waterfront in Cape Town, you find another black people there. They are all converged at KFC. They have the same amount of spending. Then there are restaurants there that sells calamari. Calamari is not 300 rand. It can't be that we don't want to eat calamari. We can't have a tradition that says we want to eat KFC only. But the complexity of the person seeing himself sitting in a restaurant in Waterfront, Bahia, it becomes the problem, the self-confidence issue. I had an incident there, I don't want to go into it, but I was even put in one restaurant behind the door, right? When you come in on the right, there was a small table, I was put there. I couldn't sit in that table, and I had to whisper to the manager that because I'm a Xhosa man, sitting behind the door, anyway, I do know, even when I'm getting into a boardroom, I know exactly where to sit. I can't sit behind the door because that makes me a boy. And I had to go and explain that to the restaurant owner. Sorry, you might not have any other tables, but based on my own orientation and culture, I can't sit on the restaurant on the table that is behind the door. So all of these things, and by the way, they were so appreciative because the lady that was sitting me in was insistent, but look, you must sit there. But I didn't get to quickly move it to a race issue because we are talking here with, the waiter. I can't come to a restaurant to sit and buy, and then I'm already infuriated by some theatrics of a waiter to begin with, irrespective. Because that waiter needs my tip for the day to begin with. So, and if I get irritated because he's putting me there without explaining to her what is my issue, and two, making sure that I'm a paying customer here, when I get angry and I leave the restaurant, then it allows them to remain in the space alone. They are happy because they don't care. If I did sit in, I don't sit, it doesn't matter. Actually, the fact that you are black and you've left, it's -1 problem. But all I'm saying is...
Sorry, Angela, I need to engage you on this particular point, I think.
I want to weigh in now, if the chairman permits me, on the diaspora issue, because I'm involved in it quite intimately. I know, because the question also asked, how can we leverage on the kind of expertise? There are about 230 million There is no shortage of Africans who are now saying we want to come and invest in the continent. One in which I'm involved, which will be launched next month. In fact, later this evening, we'll be having a meeting about it. And the spread is continental. The spread is in the United States, in Australia, and in Europe. And what is being done is to organize people in the diaspora with a view to understanding how they can be useful to us. And they are in the medical field, in the business sector, in the area of aviation, in all these critical areas. And I think that there is a wake-up call. The Africans in the diaspora are now beginning to say, for how long shall we depend on the IMFs? Is it not possible for us to, say, for example, raise money and buy 25% of the African Development Bank and be involved in infrastructure development? Can we be involved in the area of investing in pharmaceuticals? Can we be also leverage on the 5G technology? Can we be involved in the banking sector? Can't we not be part of the bullion bank, gold-based, as the world continues to de-dollarize? And the beauty of these engagements is that they are no longer WhatsApp-based theoretical things. They are things that are happening on the ground, and people are putting their money where their mouths are. If you are a board member, we are telling you, contribute 5,000 shillings as a membership fees, and also promise that you will marshal people over a period of 1 year to raise $100,000, and we begin to engage governments, because you cannot ignore governments. Engage governments, engage private sectors, engage organizations such as yourself, and I hope that beyond today's conversation, linkage that we have created with BMF is one of the things that we'll use to leverage and to connect you with ADDI so that you can be part of the footprint in South Africa and within the SADC region. So something is happening, and we are beginning to tap that talent, because we must get our men and women wherever they are in the world. And one is not talking, and this is what I conclude with. When we say that the African, the diaspora, we are not saying that they relocate back to the continent. I keep on telling African Americans that you are Americans, don't apologize. You are an American before Mayflower landed there. And therefore, America is as much yours as it is of the other people who belong to it. But you have a mother continent where your heart must not always be removed from.
Absolutely, Prof. I think, I'm not sure if it's my connection or the Prof's connection, but I think, yes, Prof? Okay, I think we definitely heard you. What I would have liked to ask, Prof, if you allow me, is
and I think that Nwabisa.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? So Prof, what I actually wanted to find out is, so people on this call, or perhaps members or partners of the BMF, how would they be able to tap into that kind of conversation?
What I'll do is, through you, Mr. Chair, when we are launching these in the next few weeks, I will invite you to the meeting so that you sit in the launch and thereafter connect you.
Okay.
Of the good lady called Arikana Chihombri Kwao, who is we are working with very closely in this regard. And we will link you, and I'll ensure this is a mandate that I give myself to ensure that you are part of the party going forward.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Mlala?
And I'll certainly extend that to our constituency.
Yes, indeed.
I think absolutely that's brilliant. If I may, there's one point that Mr. Mlala you were making, and I think it's a point that is the Prof was making earlier, but also was made on the chat, and it's really about this issue of inferiority complex, right? And I think, you know, for different people it may mean different things, but perhaps the question to ask is, there's a real sort of mental breakthrough that has to happen, right, for people to occupy spaces that were never designed for them, and spaces where by their very nature, you know, people are not wanted in those spaces. And I think perhaps we need to walk us through, you know, the exercise of that mental breakthrough, you know, one that says, you know, I need to be in this space, I need to be able to occupy the space because I am worthy. How does one kind of jump, you know, from that? I think somebody else in the chat actually basically said, oh, but you know, the issue is that, you know, Black people hate each other. I don't know if that is the case, but I do know that there is certainly an issue where people are struggling to actually just mentally, you know, make the jump to be able to occupy spaces that don't want them.
Thanks, Namis. I would just briefly, because I wanted the Prof maybe to take one or two other questions. Yes, you see, Nabisa, from a person of myself and many of my youth and generation, is that, first of all, you grew up in the village, right? chasing cows there in the middle of nowhere. And then your parents have some 4-room house in the town, which is Mthatha, and then they move you there. And then Mthatha becomes a huge city compared to the village life, right? Now, the adaptation and you becoming a modern person or living in that, the self-confidence of the village. So when you go on holiday in December from Mthatha to the village, you are the guy. So naturally, there's an unintended ingrained self-confidence that comes to you. Now, when you leave Mthatha, and remember, Mthatha now is a town, and you are going to Cape Town, it's a city. Because you have had the transition of the self-confidence, whether you were a village guy or there are many things that builds confidence, whether you were top in sports, whether you won Mr. Personality, I was involved in the Tata Junior Council. So the mindset has to be ingrained very early. And I think then the SARS core student politics helped us to even start speaking English regularly. It's not like we went to the multiracial schools. It's not like we caught on with the grammar and other things as we were talking politically. As you could see, we don't have the accent. But the confidence of, when you're presenting yourself into a house committee election, standing in the TV room. Then the next year you are on the student center presenting yourself into the public of the university for an SRC position. All of those things combined, they give you only the confidence to be able to talk, because inferiority starts with the ability to think, I can't even ask because it's not meant for me. It's not for me. Then you grow into it. It's never, but you must always have a base. Your grandfather must have cows that were milked in the village. But if you don't have a base, the level of the confidence, for whatever reason, is always, because even in the village, there's a hefty discrimination amongst us on if there's few cows in your home, you don't come even inside the yard when there's a cow that is slaughtered. They throw the meat on the outside of the yard to feast there. That's how this thing gets to be difficult, is that we castigate, we exercise each other, but you need, as a person, first to build in you. You can imagine, Nobisa, when you have to have confidence and you are not even confident about speaking English. But now you have to go and address, even interviews are done in English. But in your daily basis and your daily life, you never speak English.
Yeah.
Then, believe me, there are many people that have had nice accent and twang that have lived by that in South Africa, with nothing else to offer. But the minute that person is postured as a well-articulated person and a well-informed person, it's just the semantics of his English, which is what kills us. So the language issue becomes an important issue. The whole issue of your own ingrained self-confidence. I don't care where you get it from, but you must have this being. I had a relationship with Butemba at a very young age in Cape Town, and I ingrained myself in them. Whilst they were executives, they didn't ask me a question, what are you doing? I wasn't part of the young professionals in the corporate world. And before you know it, when you go to Sandam at 6th floor and you bump into your friends, who never gets to 6th floor. Because in the corporate, the relationship between the chief executive and the intern and the professional is very, very not the one that can ever make you have any confidence. But when you start going to C-suite and engage, then you don't ever again see the difference. So I don't know, but I wanted to overemphasize the basis of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Nobisa,
Yes, please.
if I could just quickly add as well. I think for me, what Professor Lumumba said about apartheid still being alive in South Africa, I think a lot of it is still social conditioning mostly by the minority, because I think there's an assumption automatically when you are an affirmative action candidate or an employee that you got there because of your color. And yet the reality is that we all study at the same universities. And I don't know a single Black professional who's ever asked for anything free. All we want is an opportunity and access to capital and access to markets and access to being exposed to corporate environment. I firmly believe that nobody is born with knowledge. So we have the social conditioning, and I think, you know, the issue of an inferiority complex and a poor attitude being the twin of it, you know, it's something that is actually within our control. And it's something that we definitely can change once we, you know, once we say, look, that is the problem. So we identify the problem so that we can work on it. And I think also with this whole BE levels that have been created in South Africa, I mean, it's a huge farce. You can have a white company with one Black director in a law firm being a level 1 according to amended codes. I mean, it's ridiculous, the dilution of level 1. There's no value in being a level 1 company anymore, because white companies can also be level 1, strangely enough. So I think that, you know, specifically in regards to that element, there's this notion that we need to be trained, because the assumption is that we automatically are stupid as Black professionals. And that conditioning is continuously perpetuated even in our own minds. So white corporate South Africa, when they embrace transformation, their answer to the call for transformation is that they are willing to give money for us to go study at a university. Now, while we don't discount that we do want to organically grow leaders and specialize people in certain management levels, we don't discount that at all. We're not also saying that we know everything and we want top position based on nothing. I think there's that sort of you know, like the professor says, it's an undercurrent. It's not seen, but it's felt. You almost feel crazy because you feel it. But you can't really put your finger on it. But it speaks to that conditioning still that Black people are told in not maybe direct words that they are inferior. So they feed into our existing fears of inferiority. So I think that is also something that as a Black professional and as a Black intellectual, we must be able to see, and we must be able to come. And even Black other professionals who have made it say to us that as a Black child, you are raised to be told you must be 130% better. Nobody else, white kids don't get told, you know, you must be 130% better. One would think you can't get more than 100%. But as Black children and as Black professionals, we always told, look, guys, the world is not kind to Black people, so you have to be better. And of course, we're not arguing that we want to be of a better standard. And naturally, we become better because we know that that's our competitive edge. But I think it feeds into what the president was saying, what the prof was saying about, you know, inferiority and poor attitude. And I just felt I needed to share that with the panelists.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tasneem. Colleagues, we've basically got 15 minutes until the session ends. And what I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes, there's two particular questions that I'd like the prof to answer, if he doesn't mind. And then after that, I'll call Tasneem to close off, to give a vote of thanks, and then I'll close the session. The first question, Prof, is the one from Glenn, who's basically asking whether there is an equivalent of Davos in Africa. I mean, we all know world leaders kind of every year, beginning of the year, they go to Davos and have these conversations, and I think, you know, it's really about the principle of how then does Africa you know, work together in that regard. And the second question, Prof, I want to raise to you, I see from Kopano, who's asking whether you think your view on our constitution, whether you think it is an enabler of continued inequality, particularly about the fact that it's been hailed as the best in the world, or one of the best in the world. Is our problem really the constitution? And I think probably Nomlala has actually said that, part of our problem is really the implementation of it. But I think your views on the matter would be appreciated.
Thank you very much. Let me start by also weighing in on the question of self-esteem, because I think that is very critical. And I can't agree more with Tasneem in her argument that this is something that is imposed externally and is something that we can unlearn. I think, and to me, education then becomes very important. What do we teach our young children when they grow up? And it starts from the early childhood education. So curriculum review going forward is going to be very important in order to inculcate a sense of self-worth in our young men and women. And I see that happening in quite a number of countries. We are beginning to ask ourselves, what are we teaching our people? What are we teaching our young men and women? Does it give them the confidence to carry themselves as men and women who have the capacity to deliver? And we have demonstrated. I mean, if you go around the world, I was amazed at one time not too long ago that a Nigerian doctor was the first person in the world to conduct a surgery in utero. And we don't make noise about it. And there is a sense, therefore, in which Africans are doing amazing things in the world. And I think it is the book that I started with when I talked about miseducation. When you are miseducated, it means that you can be re-educated. And all of us are beginning to do. You are the BMF. You are part of that process of inculcating a sense of self-worth so that you don't have to apologize. You don't have to go to KFC and sit behind doors. You are asserting yourself, but doing so in a manner that is dignified, so that you don't always play the race card at every moment. You must not. There are occasions when you simply have to assert yourself, but in a manner that opens the eyes of the other person, because even the whites sometimes need re-education. They need to be educated. They were brought up in a system that made them think they were superior. They are now learning to their chagrin that they are not. So everybody, there is a sense in which the prisoner and the imprisoner need education, so to speak. The second question that Glenn has asked is about, do we have an African equivalent of Davos? Perhaps let me use Addis Ababa, because that is where African leaders congregate. And I think it used to be said of the African Union that it was a toothless bulldog. It was simply an annual jamboree of leaders, which there was nothing to write home about. But I think that the leaders themselves and the Africans working in that bureaucracy recognize that the world is becoming a little more difficult. And the whole idea of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area confirms to me that that realization has come home. You know, there is a Zambian lady whom I encourage you to read if you have not read her, Mbisa Moyo, who has written the book Dead Aid. And her thesis and her statement in that regard is that you can never lift yourself out of poverty by receiving aid from anybody. And right now, Africa is beginning to recognize that even the Bretton Woods institution, the IMF, and the multilateral partners such as the European Union or the United States of America are becoming more inward-looking. So there'll be no money out there to be given to African countries, which means that it is through innovation and creativity that we are going to ensure that we solve our affairs. So these jamborees that you see being held in Berlin with Angela Merkel, or in Sochi with Putin, or in Beijing with Xi Jinping, or in Washington with Trump, they are going to be very minimal. We are going to meet much more in Addis Ababa or in Accra, and we are going to think much more as Africa, so that when we meet the world, the world is going to respect us as people who are organized. Somebody I've seen, I just asked which book did I talk about, is Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo. Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo is a good book to talk about. So I think we have our own equivalent of Davos, and I think that that is a good thing, and going forward, it will solve our problems. Well, you've asked about the South African Constitution. You know, the word best is one that sometimes is used very loosely. And regarding the South African Constitution post-apartheid, it has been described as one of the best constitutions. And I want to be a little guarded and guided as I talk about this. It is best in the context of the circumstances from which South Africa, the new South Africa, arose. I mean, you came from a difficult past where you are trying to balance different interests. You are trying to balance the interests of an enemy who has not been conquered in that sense. You know, the other African countries had a colonialist who left. The British left, the French left, and I'm using the word left in very guardedly because they left, but they are still there. But they left in that sense. The Portuguese left, the Italians left, but the architects of apartheid South Africa did not leave anywhere, to go anywhere. They are still within the country. They are saying we are still part of you. So the South African Constitution was one that was designed to accommodate an oppressor who promised that we will not oppress you anymore, but will become better citizens of this new South Africa, the nation. And therefore, it was a constitution that was balancing interests, a constitution that seeks to accommodate a majority that has been disadvantaged and a minority that has been privileged. And that is why, as Naslin said, you are the only constitution in the world that writes about the rights of the majority in their constitution. That is a reversal. It is always the minorities who are protected, but in this case, it is the majority who are protected in that sense. So to that extent, there was a lot of balancing, and there are a lot of things that your constitution is beautiful about in terms of recognizing of rights, in terms of workers' rights. There are many things that one can say about the South African Constitution. As being a student of constitutional law, I'm aware about its jurisprudential beauty. But the Bible is beautiful. If it's only the beauty of the Bible that could make us good, then we would all be very good people. The Quran is very beautiful. The Hindu Gita is very beautiful. So it's not in the beauty of the content that we must reside, it's in the implementation. How do we live the Constitution? Is the constitutionalism? Is it alive? Are the words of the Constitution jumping out of the Constitution to address the person in Mtata? Is it somebody addressing the rights of somebody in Mpumalanga or in Cape Coast or in Free State? So we are saying that the gap between the textual beauty and the practical implementation is the one that must be bridged. And this is why there's this clamor within the political class, within the business class, within the civil society, that the gulf is not narrowing, and in certain cases it is even widening. So I think going forward, the challenge not only of the politicians, but of the business community, of the religious community, and indeed everybody, of the whites, of the blacks, of the Indians, is to give practical beauty to the Constitution so that they live the Constitution. It does not become a hollow statement which you simply recite like you do the national anthem or the national goals. People want to see its beauty at their dinner table. They want to see its beauty when they are looking for a job. They want to see its beauty when they are looking for opportunities. They want to see its beauty when they are in the boardroom. When women are being told that this is a constitution that gives you opportunity, they don't want tokenism where when you appoint one woman into a board, you make noise as if there's been a third world war. You want to see actual practical implementation of the Constitution. And I think that this is a war and is a duty that we must all fulfill. And going forward, Each one of us must play their part. The president of Tanzania, whom I love, used to say that in matters such as this, you play your part. And BMF must play its part. Because if you think you are God's gift to the world, you'll discover that God doesn't operate in that way. So you play your part and work with others to play your part, and lo and behold, we will realize our goals. But I want to conclude, Mr. President, with this statement. It is from a lady who I think was enlightened in great humility, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She said that when you enter into a room where there is darkness, you have two options. Option number one is that you can complain about darkness, and the darkness will never disappear, and it will envelop you, and you too will be consumed in it. But there is another option which she recommended and which I recommend. When you get into a dark room, light a candle. And in your own immediate environment, there will be light. And you ask the others to light candles. And lo and behold, the candle so lit will conquer the darkness. And I think that is the attitude. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely compelling. Thank you so much, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to call the Deputy President of the BMF, Ms. Tasneem Fredericks, to give us her closing remarks.
Thank you, Nobisa. Part of my closing remarks I've already made, like I said, and also just to, part of the BMF talks to leadership, ethical leadership, progressive leadership, cathedral leadership, but also talks to discipline. So I'd like to finish within 4 minutes so as not to delay anyone. I'm not going to make too much of a concluding remark because I think we've encapsulated the message that's critical for me to take away that Prof Lumumba has given us is that he said there is hope, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is not an oncoming train. So we must be careful of lights because they can be deceptive. But fortunately, Prof is saying it's a positive light. It's a light that we look forward to seeing, and it's a light that keeps us going until we reach the end of the tunnel. And we get to the true, because you can't have political freedom without economic emancipation. And I think that is what the series is about. It's about economic emancipation for Black people, more importantly for Black women. We face triple oppression. We haven't even touched on those issues. It was an issue that was raised during apartheid, the pre-liberation struggle. Black women fought the fact that they were Black first and women second, and we also know that there's massive gender pay gap. So our series will focus on those issues later on. Let me then conclude by just saying a quick, vote of thanks. And I always say that thanks should always be given at the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. We have this habit that we formed, and it's perhaps informed by our Western culture, where we only give thanks, after the event. In any event, we do thank Prof Lumumba from the depths of our heart as the BMF for his time, for his, it's easy to say that I don't want to be part of an organization, but he has said, and it doesn't matter how much money we pay. It could be some, it's a principled thing. You want to associate. He's also invited us to say, not only do I believe in the BMF as an organization that advances the socioeconomic rights, we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think what we've learned from the Black Lives Matter movement is that the Black struggle is a global struggle. I think that's the important thing. And it's a struggle that we, in South Africa, are perhaps the connoisseurs in, that perhaps other people should be looking to South Africa and Africa in terms of how do they deal with this struggle. It's not an American thing, it can never be. It's an African thing. So let me conclude then. I've got a minute just to say thank you very much to very important pivotal people. I thank Prof Lumumba. I thank him again. The President has already acknowledged important guests. past presidents, deputy presidents, provincial, local leadership of the various BMF branches. Also, I think important in this Black Lives Matter struggle is that we highlight the necessity to collaborate and work together with other Black sister organizations, like the BBC, like ABASA, like BLA, like BCA. I mean, all these Black formations, we can't be operating in silos. We need to be all sitting in the same room and advancing the plight of the banking sector, of the agricultural sector, of the infrastructure sector. We can't be having this conversation. There's power in numbers. There's powers in being a union of a one identity. And then that identity, like Prof Lumumba said, is the human race. So we invite, I mean, BMF is a non-racial organization. If people identify with our cause, they must come and they must help us, and they must help us advance this plight. So we've already acknowledged the audience that are in attendance, leadership. Also, just to say, our special sponsors and people who believe in us, who make things like this possible. We do need money to make things like this possible. Our BMF partners and anchor sponsors, Sizwe Medical Fund. You know, we don't have to belong to Discovery. There's a Sizwe Medical Fund we can belong to. Part of that is Buying Black. So let's look into that. Standard Bank, Sanlam, and the lecture sponsor in this instance is, of course, Vodacom. And then I also thank you, Nwabisa, for doing an excellent job. I thank the BMF president as a co-panelist. I always enjoy being with him, not only as a panelist, but just listening to him. He does inspire me, even though I'm older than him, but not by much. Don't worry. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to members of the BMF and people who are not members. This is a movement. So please join the BMF and help us take this movement from a grassroots. You know, we need BMF agents in these different sectors that are going to be monitoring and ensuring that there's an advancement of the BMF agenda. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tazim. Let me close the session by saying, Prof, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you for your work, your passion for this continent. Thank you, Tazim. Thank you to the president of the BMF. It's been an honor for me to be in this, to facilitate this session today. Thank you, and keep safe. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.